sad passing of the former Deputy Prime Minister, former Nationals leader, former Australian Ambassador to the Holy See, Tim Fischer. Tim Fischer has been gravely ill for some time with leukaemia. He passed away today at the age of 73 in Albury, Wodonga. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, has just released a statement on this passing. He says Tim Fischer was a dear friend. Jenny and I are deeply saddened by Tim's passing. Tim Fischer was a big Australian in every sense of the word. Big in stature, big in his belief, big in his passion, big in his vision for what Australians could achieve, big in his view of Australia's place in the world. As a result, Tim Fischer will forever cast a big shadow on our nation. Jenny and my thoughts and those of our entire nation are with Tim's wife, Judy, their sons, Harrison and Dominic, and his extended family and many friends. So that's the message there from Prime Minister Scott Morrison as he touches down in Hanoi in Vietnam, a country in which Tim Fischer served when he was conscripted into the army in the 1960s. Let's have a look back at the life and times of Tim Fischer in this piece put together by Terry Galloway.
Soldier, diplomat, politician, farmer and fearless fighter for Australia, Timothy Andrew Fischer has an enviable reputation in the nation's political history. Conscripted into the Australian Army in 1966, Mr Fischer received his commission as the second lieutenant and went to Vietnam with the 1st Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment. At age 21, he commanded a platoon of 30 soldiers and fell wounded in the battle for Fire Support Base Coral, the biggest battle involving Australians in the Vietnam conflict. He spent months recovering in the Australian Field Hospital at Vung Tau.
A patient at the Australian Field Hospital at Vung Tau is Second Lieutenant Tim Fischer. He comes from Booree Creek via Wagga.
Hello folks, surprise. I have this opportunity to wish you a happy Christmas. It's Sunday the 3rd of November here at Vung Tau. I hope the weather for Christmas Day at home is as good as this beautiful fine day today. All the best, and I look forward to seeing you early next year.
Post-Vietnam, he bought a farm at Booree Creek in the Riverina and soon joined the Country Party to begin a long political career, entering the New South Wales Parliament in 1971. Federal politics called, and in 1984, Tim Fischer went to Canberra in the seat of Farrer, served on the front bench in opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the National Party.
Mr Speaker, my question is directed to the Treasurer, and this without notice.
And with the election of the Howard government, became Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Trade. During this time, Tim Fischer fought numerous internal battles. The National Party's strength weakened when the Liberals won enough seats to govern without the coalition partners. The Mabo and Weck decisions on Indigenous land ownership also placed Mr Fischer in a poor political situation. His rural base also came under attack with the rise of Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party.
I call the Honourable Member for Oxley.
In making my first speech in this place, I congratulate you on your election and wish to say how proud I am to be here as the independent member for Oxley.
Tim Fischer retired from the Parliament in 2001 and swung into campaign mode again as Chairman of Tourism Australia. In 2008, then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd appointed Tim Fischer Australia's first resident ambassador to the Holy See. During his time at Rome, Mr Fischer oversaw the canonisation in 2010 of Mary MacKillop as Australia's first saint by Pope Benedict XVI. 18 months later, Mr Fischer announced his retirement and a return to farming with a cattle property near Yakandanda in northern Victoria with his wife Judy and sons Dominic and Harrison, and devoted much of his time to his lifelong obsession with trains. In this role, he undertook the first journeys of the Ghan from Adelaide to Darwin and the first freight train to make the crossing to the north. Tim Fischer has also been a strong advocate for the return to steam trains and high-speed rail links employing the latest world technology. In October 2018, Tim Fischer revealed his 10-year battle with blood cancer and announced he suffered acute myeloid leukemia. Australia recognised Tim Fischer's contribution and loyal service in 2005, making him a Companion of the Order of Australia. His military awards include the Australian Active Service Medal, the Vietnam Medal and the South Vietnamese Vietnam Service Medal. Argentina, Chile and Brazil also honoured his service, and the Holy See bestowed a papal knighthood, dubbing Tim Fischer a Knight of the Order of Pius IX. Terry Galloway, Sky News.
And as we brought you earlier, Prime Minister Scott Morrison has released a statement about the passing of Tim Fischer upon his arrival in Hanoi today. We've talked earlier too about how Tim Fischer was respected across the political aisle. There's a tweet just been issued by the opposition leader, a former opposition leader that is, Labor's Bill Shorten. He says, "Vale Tim Fischer, doting dad and parent carer, General Monash advocate, veteran, public servant, good Australian." So strong praise there from the former Labor leader, Bill Shorten. Let's cross back to Canberra now and get the latest from David Spears. David, Tim Fischer was one of those people who crammed everything he possibly could into every day on this planet.
Yeah, and when you watch, Terry's piece there about the life and times of Tim Fischer, and you see references, I mean, even from Bill Shorten in that tweet you just put up, parent carer. A lot of people wouldn't know that part of the reason he left politics in '99 was to spend more time with his kids, one of whom has autism, and he's spent a lot of time working in that field as well. His war service, so many aspects to this man beyond the political role that he played here as Deputy Prime Minister. But that role too, it's really worth acknowledging how important he was to the success of John Howard and the Howard government, particularly on a couple of notable occasions. The gun law reforms after Port Arthur. Tim Fischer and his deputy at the time, John Anderson, had a really tough time in pushing through those reforms that their base in the National Party, a lot of them fiercely resisted. That took a lot of political courage, and we all owe a debt to Tim Fischer for the effort that he put in to hold the coalition together on that and get that job done. I think also worth noting too the political role he played. You saw in Terry's piece there, dealing with the rise of Pauline Hanson and One Nation first time around. This caused enormous division within the coalition, how to deal with this threat. Tim Fischer did play a very key role, along with others like Ron Boswell and so on at the time in Queensland, in, again, trying to win back votes that had drifted to One Nation, back to the coalition, keeping the Howard government in power for the years and years they were in power. So, look, an enormous legacy, but as we discussed earlier too, Chris, his life post-politics didn't really slow down. I mean, a sign of the cross-party affection for Tim Fischer. Kevin Rudd, a Labor Prime Minister, appointed him ambassador to the Holy See for the first time. His enthusiasm for trains, his campaigning, ultimately unsuccessfully, for Sir John Monash to be posthumously promoted to Field Marshal. Didn't win, but he never gave up on that. I mean, I interviewed him time and again over this issue, both in the United States, here in Canberra as well, and just in the last couple of years about this. He felt so passionately about that, so passionately about so many things, that even as he was battling this cancer, he was just full of energy to try and make change in Australia that he saw as a necessary change. Indeed,
David, I interviewed him on radio about that issue just last summer, I think, and when I mentioned to him that we should keep the conversation going, he seemed very well aware that he might not be around for much longer, so he was fighting very, very hard on that issue, even while he was really battling for his own health. There's so much you've covered there, David. The only other aspect I might throw in there as well is that he was a very strong environmentalist as well, and I've heard stories from many journos who have wanted to go and meet with Tim, and he's essentially taken them on a bushwalk.
Well, of course, famously, the Nationals during election campaigns do what's called the Wombat Trail, and Tim Fischer, as Nationals leader, did it well. Journos follow them around all the regional areas they cover in an election campaign, and he was very much at home doing that. There's no doubt about it. Look, I started here in Canberra the year that he finished, which is almost 20 years ago now. So I had more to do with him really in his post-parliamentary life, and we touched on that. But you're right, in his time in Parliament, he could be a surprising figure, and someone I think who was underestimated a lot. Sure, maybe a bit of a hayseed he was seen as by some, the man in the hat. But boy, he had an intellect, he had a natural ability when it comes to politics, a connection with grassroots that politicians today, I think, really struggle to attain and find. He just had it naturally. He could talk to all walks of life. He was very much at home, whether he's on the back of a steam train, out in the paddocks, or here walking the halls of power in Canberra. You really don't see too many politicians of that ilk today. Absolutely. And David, finally, it's probably too early to get details, but of course with his military honours, his civic honours, his
political honours and his church honours, there's the potential here to be something of a state funeral, quite a coming together to commemorate Tim Fischer in days and weeks to come.
Yeah, I'd be amazed if there's not a state funeral. I think there should absolutely be a state funeral for someone like Tim Fischer. I don't think you'll hear anyone disagree with that. Look, the details will be worked out, I'm sure, with his family and so on. But there'll be plenty of people lining up to offer their tributes, their respect, their love for this Australian who's been lost today.
Thanks very much. David Spears there, political editor of Sky News, live from Canberra on the passing of former Deputy Prime Minister Tim Fischer at the age of 73.